So I think it's safe to say we've all seen the Season 9 patch notes by now, but just in case you're living under a rock, let me get you up to speed in 20 seconds. Almost all projectiles and bullets are bigger and easier to hit. DPS and supports get 50 more HP each. Tanks get 75 to 100 more HP or armor each. All heroes gain new self-healing passive that takes effect 5 seconds after leaving combat. DPS get a new passive that reduces healing by 20% to the target they're damaging. All ults take 10% longer to build. Damage increases almost across the board to keep time to kill relatively similar, and Pharah gets reworked for more versatile mobility. This is by far the biggest patch Overwatch 2 has ever received and could be as impactful to how the game is played as removing one tank was. I'm going to start with my thoughts on which heroes will get worse, which will get better, and which will stay about the same power level. Then I'm going to make a meta prediction for the highest level and the average player. Starting with the tanks that are getting worse, I have Wrecking Ball, who gets no changes except 75 armor. I think they're planning to rework him, but he's going to be completely awful until they do. Then I have Zarya, who also gets no HP or damage buffs. Her beam width is increased, but good players were already able to have high axe, so it's a relatively small buff. I also have Roadhog because although he gains 100 health and a slightly easier to hit hook, the new DPS passive really butchers Hog. And Ramattra, who gains 75 health only and some projectile size increases on his Omnic form, but it won't be quite enough to hold his power level. Junker Queen, who only gets damage over time increase on her ult, and Mauga, who relies heavily on his sustain, which will be much less reliable in Season 9. For tanks will be about the same strength. I have Reinhardt, who loses his 2-shot fire strike potential, but that was fairly niche anyways. His hammer now does 100 damage, so he'll remain the king of close range brawling. Orisa, who gains 75 more armor and an even easier to hit javelin. Diva, who receives buffs to keep self-destruct consistent with the new HP pools and gets 75 more armor on her mech. And Doomfist, who gets no HP buffs, but his punches getting even more lethal, which I personally think is a bad direction for him, but it won't be enough to break him since his health is staying the same. I only have 2 tanks which I believe will do better, and that's Winston, who's gaining some much needed armor, along with a buff to his Tesla Cannon and Primal Rage. Since armor is increasing across the board, Tesla Cannon keeps getting more valuable each patch. And lastly Sigma, even though we only receive 75 shield and projectile size buffs, I think it's going to impact him more than most characters as his primary fire is quite difficult to land, which should put him in an even better spot post patch. For DPS that will be getting worse, I have Ashe, who's losing the reload speed passive that fits her kit extremely well. Bob gets a buff, but she doesn't apply the new passive easily compared to much of the cast. Junkrat, who can no longer one-shot a squishy with a nade plus mine combo. Widow, who only gets 25 HP, and fall off will be more noticeable since people have larger HP pools in general. She's also terrible at applying the new DPS passive. Sojourn, who loses her one-shot with a mercy pocket, but can easily apply the passive to make up for it. This makes her less oppressive at the high ranks, but still viable at the lower ranks, which is a good direction for her. Hanzo, who's losing his one-shot headshot, but gains a solid buff to Storm Arrows to try and make him viable, which I don't really think it will. And Genji, who is bad at applying the passive, and Dryblade is going to be even worse than it already is. Nanoblade getting a buff will be the only redeeming factor of this patch for Genji mains. For DPS, I only have a few characters I think will stay about the same, which are Tracer, who only is getting 25 more health, but she can easily apply the new passive, and the self-regen will really help her while she's in the backline. Symmetra is gaining extra shield health and increased projectile size and beam size, which should keep her in a pretty neutral place compared to the rest of the cast. Cassidy is receiving high new buffs in addition to more extra health. Mei's going up to 300 HP and can apply the passive fairly easily. And Echo gets buffs to almost every part of her kit, although each one is pretty minor. There are a lot of DPS who really benefit from this patch, which makes sense considering they get the new passive. Soldier, Bastion, Reaper, Sombra, and Torb all get better because they're good at applying the new passive. 20% reduction on healing should not be understated, and a lot of these characters don't lose any breakpoints either, which is common in the burst-related DPS, like Hanzo or Sojourn. Pharah gets a big rework, which should make her less reliant on Mercy and more able to make plays on her own. I believe her skill floor and ceiling will both be raised, which will make her worse at the lower ranks and better at the higher ranks. Pharah Mercy will still be strong, but no longer the end-all be-all combo of gold and below. For supports that will be getting worse, I have Kiriko, who can no longer 2-tap to the head. I know it's frustrating to lose a duel to a support, but without her 2-tap, Kiriko's really going to struggle. Her win rate's already pretty bad, but you still have to play her because Cleanse is such a necessary ability. In addition to that, her projectile size is getting nerfed while everyone else is getting a buff. Ana, who can no longer get a kill with 3 shots, or a kill with a nade and 2 shots. Gone are the days where landing asleep meant you could usually convert a solo kill, now you just have to run away to your teammates. Lifeweaver, who's only getting 25 more HP, and suffers more from the new DPS passive than most supports, since his value comes mostly from his healing throughput. And Illari, who loses her 2-tap and gains no additional buffs besides HP. Illari was already pretty bad for a long time, but I think think she's going to be absolutely terrible now. For supports, I only have 2 characters that are staying about the same, which are Brig, who didn't really rely on any breakpoints in the first place and is also receiving 10 extra damage per melee, and Baptiste, whose shift ability gets an indirect buff due to characters having more HP. Last of all is the supports I think will do better this patch. Mercy, who gets value from damage boost, and damage is getting buffed in comparison to healing. Zenyatta for the same reasons as Mercy. Moira, who again doesn't deal with any breakpoints. Moira also gets an easier to hit suck and more DPS. In fact, her new time to kill on a 250 HP target will be faster than her old time to kill on a 200 HP target, and it's easier to hit. Don't sleep on Moira in Season 9. And finally Lucio, who's getting quite the buff on his boop, along with the fact that speed can be used a little more freely with everyone having more base health. Let's move on to full metas and what I think will be seen the most. I want to make a quick note that I don't really believe in metas unless you're in GM1, but that's a conversation for another day. At the highest ranks, I expect to see a large shift from the current Brawl sustain focus meta we have. Meta on the ladder is usually built around which tanks are the best at the time, and JQ, Ramatra, and Hog have been popular picks, as well as Sigma on his more popular maps. With the introduction of the DPS passive, tanks that rely more on their own sustain will be comparably weaker since the passive will almost always be applied to them. I expect to see Hog completely drop off and JQ also take a big hit in terms of playability. Sigma Brawl with Bap Lucio or Poke with Bap Xin will be very strong, and Mercy pocketed soldiers will be all over the place as well. I expect to see a lot of Doom to break Sigma comps and also deny the DPS, which will be the strongest category of heroes in Season 9. The last tank I think we'll see a lot of playtime is Ramatra, who has great sustain with Nemesis form armor and block, as well as high kill potential even in the new season. At these ranks, I think Sojourn's gonna fall off big time in favor of Soldier, and high uptime burst DPS such as Tracer and Echo will be played alongside them to complete the roster. The occasional Widow will still come out as well due to how high the mechanical skill level of GM1 players are. The metal ranks will see a lot of changes, but not all the same ones as the high ranks. Hog will still be virtually unplayable, but I think Ryan will become the king of Brawl against players who don't respect his hammer range. Kiriko will still be played in every game, despite having a 43% global win rate because your tank has no idea what an anti-nade is, or how to not get hit by it. Lucio Mercy will no longer be a troll comp, and Mercy's Zen will become even more lethal than it already was. DPS Moiras will be thriving, Pharah Mercy will be dying, and Hanzo's will be crying every time they headshot and don't get a kill. Hanzo and Mercy will become a combo that gets fairly good playtime but low success rates because, let's be honest, most Hanzos are barely getting enough headshots in Season 8 to carry their own weight, much less 2 players worth. Nanoblade will be the strongest ult combo in the game up until Masters, but picking Genji without Ana will be almost as much of a throw pick as playing Junk will be. Later in the season, Wrecking Ball will receive his long-awaited rework and still only be played by ball players, which, to be honest, the rest of the player base will be fine with. Roadhog will need to receive some type of buff in order to not be the worst tank in the game at that point. Genji will be renamed to Bladebot for April Fools, but they'll forget to change it back the next day because it's too accurate. Illari will have her ult Giga buffed again, and still see the lowest pick rate of any support, and Moira will need some sort of damage nerf, otherwise she'll continue to be the best DPS in the game. Pharah will wear the crown for the most complained about hero in the game for a few weeks, until people learn how to play against her new mobility. And then everyone will realize she isn't actually that good, you just have to be aware of where she is constantly, similar to a Sombra. Lastly, Brig will receive a nerf simply because Mace to the Face will have 3 Brig accounts in the top 5 on ladder by the mid-season patch, and honestly his reign of terror has been going on for way too long now. I could keep theorizing all day long, but in reality, it's very hard to predict what's going to happen when literally every character in the game is getting changed. I also want everyone to keep in mind these patch notes were leaked, so they're not likely a full list of changes, and some information may or may not come true in the new season, but I'm doing the best with what I have. If you have any input on my takes, feel free to leave a comment down below and I will respond and we can duke it out in Mercy Boxing 1v1s to validate our opinions. That being said, this has been my opinion on the upcoming Season 9 patch. I hope you enjoyed and I will see you in the next video.